My name's David Haas, and you're listening to the Rise Up Rich podcast, which is dedicated to helping you level up and enrich all areas of your life. What's going on, guys? It's Dave Haas here with the Rise Up Rich podcast. I'm coming to you from quarantine in my house. My wife and I got back from Florida, and we're doing the mandatory 14-day quarantine. We're a little over halfway through, so I will be able to at least drive my car around after this thing is over. But it's definitely been interesting to be home, learning to work from home again, or not again, for the first time, like really truly working from home, and managing the baby and my wife and I, our own schedules, and like cooking every single meal at home, which is something that my wife and I didn't do a lot of until this whole coronavirus thing happened. So I apologize if the sound is not as good quality as it always is, but I'm recording this on my phone and I'm going to upload it from there. But so today what I want to talk about in this podcast is just the whole coronavirus and what's going on, and how I can hopefully help you deal with all of the fears, all of the emotions, all the stress, all the anxiety that comes along with everything that's happening here. So obviously this is like nothing that we've ever seen in our entire lives. And it's kind of an opportunity, for me to do some self-reflection and to not get caught up in, I guess, this like the day-to-day news, the day-to-day, like just getting focused on the numbers. And, there's a reason that end of the world movies did so well always, was because there's a tiny little bit of apathy. And in some people, the apathy is a lot bigger and they're more drawn to those types of movies. And basically that apathy is, I just want this all to be over. Like, life's too hard. This whole thing is, just like way too difficult, way too many emotions, way too much work. And secretly, we kind of wish that the world would just end. And now we're kind of getting a real glimpse of what that might look like. And it's not as glamorous as it was being made out to be in the movies, and all these shows like The Walking Dead and stuff like that. It's real and people are dying. And now that we have that, it's just an opportunity for us to check that apathy and be like, hey, listen, no, I still want to be alive. I still want to go hang out with my friends and family. I still want to go to, sporting events and be able to hug someone or give someone a handshake. So the one great thing that is coming out of this coronavirus is just, it gives everyone an opportunity to look at everything that they've taken for granted up until this point. And part of that would be just life itself, that we've taken life itself for granted. And once our freedom is taken away and we're quarantined inside our house and we don't have the luxuries that we once had. My wife and I just ordered groceries online and we can't get them for 2 weeks. So it's like, just creating the understanding of like how amazing our life was and will continue to be. We will get through this, right? But how amazing our life was up until that point. And, that might've been something that you or I or anyone might've been taking for granted. So great opportunity to do some self-reflection. But I want to give you some real practical things that you can do to help reduce the level of stress and anxiety that comes along with everything that's going on with this. Because there's not only the fear of, loved ones dying, you getting the virus, but there's also the fear of economics and, financially, are you going to be able to get through this? Are you going to be able to make the car payment, make the mortgage payment, especially if this thing goes on forever. So the first thing that we have to realize is that there's only one thing that we can control, which is ourself. We have no control over the coronavirus with regards to how much it's going to spread. Obviously, yeah, we can limit it by self-quarantining and doing those things, but I'm saying like this thing is really out of our control. We can do everything that we can to control it, but not to control it, but to do everything that the government's suggesting to stop the spread. And I'm sure everyone's going to do that, but it's really out of our control. This thing is completely outside of ourselves. So there's no amount of worrying that we can do that's going to improve the situation. So what stress and anxiety is related to is projecting into the future. And that's what's happening when you're watching the news. Like the news will come up with 100 different ways to say the same thing, and they'll say it 100 times. And if you get caught with that news on all day long, then that stress and that anxiety is just going to build and build and build. And before you know it, this thing's going to be so completely overwhelming that you're not even going to leave your bed, let alone your house. Okay, so we just want to remember that this is outside of our control. There's no amount of worrying that we can do that's actually going to be able to do anything about this. So how do we eliminate that fear and that worry? Well, the one great thing to do is just to really get down with a pen and paper and write out, what are your fears about this thing? Like, what are your fears? And like dig into them a little bit. Is it the fear of not being able to pay your bills? Is it which would be related to the fear of poverty? Is it the fear of getting the disease, which would be related to the fear of death? So how do you overcome the fear of poverty? How do you overcome the fear of death? Overcoming the fear of poverty is about coming to the realization that no matter what happens to you in your life, you're going to be okay. And you can do that by using the and then what scenario. And I think I've talked about this on other podcasts, but I'm going to go through it again because it's in repetition that we learn. So I'm going to repeat this again. I use the and then what approach. And when I learned this, it was a completely transformational experience because secretly, subconsciously, I was always worried about going broke or being poor. And without actually examining what that looked like, it was a very stressful time in my life because everything I was doing was to make sure I never went poor. But then when I was introduced to the and then what approach, which is basically this, you just keep asking yourself the question, and then what? So let's say, for example, we'll use the coronavirus. What happens if this thing lasts 6 months and you can't afford to pay your mortgage? And then what? Then, like I'm going to use, like, let's say for my own example, and then what to me? Well, and then I would go to my bank and ask for an extension. Oh, okay. And then I keep going with the most negatives. So, and then what will happen if your bank didn't give you the extension? Well, then I'd probably have to go and borrow money from a friend or a family. And then what happens if they wouldn't give you the money? Well, and then I would lose my house, or I'd have to sell my house. And then, in my situation, I have a ton of equity in my house. So in that scenario, I would already be okay because I would have hundreds of thousands of dollars after I sold my house. But ultimately, though, it's just about creating more awareness around what it is you're actually afraid of. And once you create that awareness, just by shining that light of awareness on it, you begin to take back some power. But what I find with a lot of my clients, what they're doing is they're asking the question, they're being stressed out, or they're asking the question, I wonder why that bothers me so much. But they're never actually taking the time to really dig into the question, and sit down with a pen and paper, sit down in meditation and ask for the truth to be revealed. Use the and then what approach, So if you just actually take some time, and now is the best time ever to take that time to do that, because we have more time than we've ever had to ourselves. The world economy is, almost completely, at a standstill. So it's like, even if you have a job, there's not that much happening even at that job. So you have the time to do this self-reflection and to start digging into the roots of what's really going on here, right? I have no fear of poverty or no fear of death. So this whole coronavirus, well, yeah, it is scary and I don't want to see people die, but for me, I'm okay with whatever happens. One, I have a confidence, or I don't know, a knowingness that I'm going to be okay no matter what happens. Whether I lose my house, lose my business, lose everything, or whether I die, I know I'm going to be okay. So the overcoming the fear of death, that one is a little bit more difficult. And the big block to overcoming the fear of death is the ego, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But overcoming the fear of death is just this. It's about believing in something higher than yourself and coming to the understanding that you are not your body and you are not your mind. You are a spiritual being who is on this earth, inside this body, inside this mind, to have a human experience. And once you truly understand that and truly believe it, and it takes some time because I know it's out there, the concept of, we're a spirit inside this body and inside this mind to experience life. I get it. It's hard to grasp that, but when you truly understand that and you truly believe it, you've truly connected to your higher self, to your soul, to your essence, to your spirit, and when you realize that's who you truly are, then you realize that you're eternal. So I don't want to lose people on this, but this is what spiritual growth is all about, is about getting connected, more connected to who you truly are, to your higher self. The ego, and this is where I want to get into the ego, and I will do a little aside here. One video that I think everyone should watch is, there's this guy named Hans Wilhelm, and you can check out his YouTube channel. It's called Life Explained. I think he also has a website, lifeexplained.com. And in that, he's like, has done all of these. He's had a spiritual practice for 40 years, and he's come to some really amazing awarenesses. But one of his videos that I truly love is his video on ego. So I really highly suggest that everyone go out and watch that video, because it really will get you to understand the concept of the ego. Now, when I say ego, I'm not talking about, oh, this guy has a big ego, he thinks he's so cool. No. What I'm talking about is, the ego is basically a mechanism that was created by our body and that was created by our mind. It could also just be described as the mind, that has been put into place to protect us. So the ego was insanely necessary, a couple thousand years ago, when if you're getting chased by a saber-toothed tiger, you needed to know not to run. You needed to know to run away, right? So the ego's primary goal is to keep us alive. That's why it was put in place. But what happened over time was that we started to identify more with the ego than we did with our higher self, right? So now we have to eradicate the ego in order to get truly connected to who we truly are. But the ego, now in the world where we don't have to run from saber-toothed tigers, it's still fully at work. And it wants to believe that it is the center of the universe. So what's happening now with the ego is that the ego is being amplified on steroids during this pandemic, because the ego will do everything in its power to make us not feel a certain way, or make us to keep us alive. So as you watch more and more news, the ego is feeling that there's fear. They're feeling that there's danger. There's a saber-toothed tiger outside of your house, right? And it's going to do everything that it can to protect you. So it's going to elevate that fear. It's going to elevate that stress, elevate that anxiety. So you don't even get out of bed, because it knows that outside it's danger, right? And it doesn't want to put the body and the mind into the path of danger. So again, as I said, yes, it's important to have that element of danger, because we didn't have that fear. We would just, jump off a 20-story building and think we could live. We have to have it. It's part of our primitive mind. We have to have the ego. But now that we're conscious beings, now that we're intelligent life forms, we can learn how to transcend that ego and still use our common sense and our ration to not make those decisions that are going to put us in harm's way. Now that we're not running from saber-toothed tigers, that level of fear is no longer serving us, but a great percentage of the population is still living in a state of fear. And this pandemic is just proof of how that fear is propelling this thing even more, is propelling this thing and making it even bigger and bigger than it is. So what you need to identify with is, what is it that you're actually feeling with regards to this pandemic? And identify it. And the fear is what we're truly feeling, is fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of how long it's going to go, fear of how it's going to impact your life, fear of getting the disease, fear of dying, fear of your loved ones dying. Okay? And we have to recognize this, that all fear is an illusion. I'm going to give you a few examples of it. All fear is an illusion. It only exists when we project into the future. We only become fearful of the coronavirus when we watch the news 24/7. We keep hearing the same thing 100 times. Right? We become more and more fearful, more and more shut in. And this is exactly what the ego is doing to us all the time without the pandemic. Okay? So let me give you an example. People pleasing. People pleasing is something that the ego created in order for you to never feel a certain way ever again. So if you did something and someone didn't like you, and you felt shame, or you felt embarrassment, or you felt fear, Maybe it's from confrontation. You did something and it created confrontation. A lot of this stems from like the parents. If you lived in a house where you had to walk on eggshells, you created a people-pleasing personality in order to never have to deal with that conflict with your parents ever in your life. And then that people-pleasing personality, that's a tongue twister, that personality trait is no longer serving you because you're just saying yes to every single person, because all the ego is trying to do is to make you never feel that fear that you felt when your dad slapped you across the face because you did something wrong, or when your mom yelled at you, or from the shame that you felt when you did something and someone called you out on it and you were embarrassed. People pleasing was the ego's response to make sure that you never have to feel that way ever again. Another example is, this is my own personal example. When I was a kid, I was playing in the garage and I was swinging on these like welding tanks, like the hoses for the welding tanks, and the welding tanks fell on top of me, and I was trapped in my garage. I was trapped underneath these welding tanks for about a half hour, screaming for help. I think I was probably like 7 years old, and finally, after about like a half hour, I don't actually know how long it was, to tell you the truth. It felt like a half hour, felt like eternity. And so finally my mom came out, grabbed me out, and I had a broken arm, broken ribs. And from that moment, what the ego created for me was fear of confined spaces. I was claustrophobic. I never wanted to be anywhere. If I was wrestling with someone and they pinned me down, I would freak out, because I had fear of being pinned down or fear of claustrophobia. That was the ego's response to protect me. But now that claustrophobia is no longer serving me, because I couldn't, like let's say when I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and when I would be in rolling situations where I'm rolling on the mat with these guys and someone would get me in a pin where I was feeling claustrophobic, I would have to tap before they even had me in a position to tap me out, because I was panicking. So I had to learn how to overcome that claustrophobia, which is just a fear that the ego created for me to never feel that pain that I experienced when I was trapped under those tanks. Okay, so I had to do this. I tried doing it in meditation and it didn't work for me, but I think it is possible to do it, to just connect to the fear that you felt as the kid being trapped into the tanks and allow that fear to burn out through the letting go technique. I think that's possible. It didn't work for me, probably because I need to continue on my path and continue to grow spiritually. But what it did work for me was I was in my attic, and I had to crawl from one bigger space to a smaller space. And in that moment, I'm in the attic, the claustrophobia kicked in, right? That fear. The ego saying, you don't go through that fucking hole because there's danger and you might get trapped in there, right? And so what I had to do with that is I just had to recognize the fact that I was in the state of fear, and this was the ego's device to try and to protect me. So how does fear feel in this moment? So I had to ask myself that question. And fear to me at that moment felt like I was short of breath. I was having trouble breathing. My heart was racing. My adrenaline was pumping. My knees were shaking. So then I sat with it. I said, can you handle this in this moment? Can you handle these symptoms, this fear? And I said, yes, of course I can handle it. So I sat there and I breathed through it, and I allowed that fear to burn out. I just observed it. I stayed with it. I didn't allow myself to run from it. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to run out of the attic. That was my first instinct. But then I stopped myself. And I allowed myself to feel that fear fully. And once I put all of my awareness, with all I could, on that fear, within 5 minutes, and it actually probably wasn't even 5 minutes, it was probably 2 minutes, all of those symptoms have completely subsided, and I was free. I crawled through the hole and did all the work that I needed to do. And in my mind, now I feel like I'm free of claustrophobia. And I'm sure it might come up again, because that was a very controlled situation. If I was in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, match, and someone pinned me down where I'm already out of breath, I might have to go through that same process again to be free of it. But this is what fear is doing to us all of the time. This is what the ego is doing to us all the time. And it's no longer serving us. So it's important for us to understand how the ego has created our behaviors. It's created our personality traits. And it's done all of this from things that have happened to us in our past, because the ego is trying to protect us. The ego wants us to survive. The ego will only survive if the body and the mind survive. So it will do everything in its power to ensure the body and the mind's safety. So if that means filling you up with fear, watching the news 24/7 to keep you from getting this coronavirus, that's what's going to happen. Okay? And it's being escalated, it's being elevated, it's being expanded. It's a great opportunity just to observe it. Just to observe it and bring awareness to it. So that's the 2 cents on ego. And I really think it's like really, really important for anyone that's listening to this podcast to do a little bit more, start digging in a little bit more to what the ego is all about and create a bigger understanding of it. Because the concept of ego for me it took me a long time to kind of fully grasp it. Okay, so, but once I did, and once I got it, and that video by Hans Wilhelm there, the ego, I think it's called Life Explained as the Ego. That was a turning point for me, and I finally fully understood it. So I really highly suggest you watch that video. I want to shift gears now, because that's about how about dealing with the stress. So just to recap really quickly, the 2 things that you can do with this is, one is just really dig into it using the and then what approach. What is it that you're really fearful of? The second is to identify how the fear is actually making you feel. Because most of us are just feeling, we don't even want to face the fear. We have fear of fear itself. Okay? So dig into how it's making you feel, and then connect to that feeling fully and allow that fear, that energy of fear to burn out. It's only when we resist feeling any emotion that we continue to give it fuel. So the same is with fear, because fear is an emotion. When we feel fear, if we just sit with it and allow it to burn out, just like I was in the attic, you can do that in any circumstance in life. Okay? So if you're a people pleaser, ask yourself, what feeling are you trying to avoid feeling by people pleasing? If you identify that and where that began, because it was something that was created, it was a belief system, it was a program. If you identify where that is, you can go back to that moment and you can relive it, and you can feel that feeling fully, so you're free of it, and then that will help you overcome the people-pleasing behavior. So that's how to deal with the stress and the anxiety and all that overwhelm. The third thing I would say is just to go on like a news fast. Like, we all know that we have to be in our houses. We all know that this thing isn't going anywhere. So don't watch the news. It's like I don't watch any news ever. And because I read that in a book once, like, just stay away from the news. And since then I've really stayed away from the news. And one thing I have learned is that if something is big enough and bad enough, you're going to hear about it, right? So I have my good friend that I sail with, Len. He watches CNN like all day long, all night long. And I know that if things get really bad, I'm going to hear from Len, right? So it's like, a lot of people say, oh, you got to stay informed, you got to know this. But do you really? What are they really promoting here, right? They're promoting the fear, and they're feeding into that ego, saying, hey, don't go outside. Don't do anything. Stay home. Stay in your bed, right? So this brings me to my next point, though, is that while everyone believes that the world is shutting down, and we're hearing things like, this is the world saying it's time to slow down, it's time to take a break. And I do believe that there is an element of that in all of this. There's an element that says, hey, maybe it's time to learn how to relax. Hey, maybe it's time to really appreciate your family and friends, to really look at that. Like, look at all the gratitude that you should have for your family and friends, right? For the country you live in. Like, I've never been more happy to be a Canadian than during this pandemic, because Canada's going to take care of you. We're going to be okay. So if you're lucky enough to live in a first world country, then you're gonna be okay, right? So this brings me to the next point, which I was trying to get to, is that while all this is good, and while, yes, we do need to kind of have this sigh of relief and taking this step back, this doesn't mean that it's time to stop doing what you're doing. This is actually an amazing opportunity for you to step up when the rest of the world is stepping back and taking a seat, and they're basically the visualization I have of this is this like, in an old recliner chair and pulling back that lever and putting their feet up. They're like, well, we're not going anywhere for the next couple of months. I might as well just watch Netflix for the next 3 months. And that is just like going to the extreme. We as people, as souls, let's say, we are, the universe or God or whatever your belief system is, rewards forward momentum, rewards action, right? They say that when people look at rich people and they say, oh, he's so lucky. And it's like, yeah, well, it's not that he's so lucky, it's that he continues to work harder and harder and harder, and he seemingly becomes more lucky than everybody else, right? It has nothing to do with luck. It has everything to do with the amount of effort. Now, this isn't about grinding or hustling. This is about connecting to your true passion. What is it you truly want to do? Because if you really are connected to that true passion, then the energy and the action can be endless. It can be like you can bounce out of bed in the morning excited to do what it is that you're supposed to do. And the universe is going to reward that. What the universe doesn't reward is inaction, right? And so the people that are sitting back and reclining are going to end up going further away from who they truly are. What we're here to do is to maximize our potential, to live out what our soul's purpose is. So that's about getting connected to our higher self and fully understanding what it is we're here to do. And when we don't maximize our potential, we feel guilty. We begin to believe that the world is against us. These types of things. We become the victim. We become apathetic. We pray for the apocalypse. So during this time, what I'm trying to articulate to you here is that this is an amazing opportunity. And let me just tell you what I'm doing. For me, I got in the mindset that the world was shutting down. And I was going to do that recliner chair, even though I don't own a recliner chair. I was going to do that recliner chair, and I was going to pull it back, and I was going to just chill because I've been busting my ass for 40 years, right? 41 years. And so I was going to do that. But then luckily, I'm lucky to have a great coach. And she said to me, no, this isn't a time to slow down. This is a time to actually ramp things up, especially for me in the coaching position, is that my clients and my potential clients and the people that follow me on social media, now is the time that they need me more than ever. And I was like, yeah, I 100% agree. So I went out after getting off that phone call and I called every single one of my clients. And guess what? Every single one of them benefited from the conversation. Guess what also? I signed up more clients. Okay, so the world has not completely shut down. The world is not ending. And this is an amazing opportunity for you to finally get connected to what it is you're truly supposed to do here and start putting that effort into going towards it. There needs to be a massive amount of action that needs to happen for you to live out your dreams, right? But it's not action, it's not grind, it's not hustle. It's action because you love it, you want to do it, right? Like speaking, coaching for me, learning. Those are the things that I would do forever and ever, 12 hours a day without pay if I had to. That's the energy that I'm talking about. But it's also an opportunity to look at other goals like health and fitness. For me, I'm on my bike. Luckily my wife bought me a stationary trainer for my bike, and every morning now I'm on my bike. I'm eating healthier than I've ever eaten because we're making all the meals at home. So it's like, are you going to come out of this thing 10 pounds heavier or 10 pounds lighter? And for me, I want it to be 10 pounds lighter, right? So there's all kinds of areas of spiritual growth. This is the opportunity for you to sit down and read the books. Always the book that I suggest is Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins. That's where I would begin. But this is an amazing opportunity to continue to grow. Don't allow all of the fear and all of the negativity to consume you to the point that you don't do anything. And you get caught up in this belief that it's time to take a step back and to relax. It's like, realistically, like most people that are listening to this podcast have been really relaxing their whole entire life, myself included. Right? And the reason being is because of these belief systems, because of the ego trying to protect us. When we try and go outside of our comfort zone, the ego wants to pull us back and say, hey, whoa, I don't know what's going on. This is unknown to me. So I'm going to bring in your fears, and, I'm going to bring in your parents and tell you that this is not what you're supposed to do. I have to do more research to try and figure out how to do that. These are all ways of you running away from what it is you're truly supposed to do. And if you haven't done the work to grow spiritually, to understand the ego and what it's trying to do to you, you'll buy into these distractions, to these the people that are out there playing at average. Because the first thing that when you start taking massive action, the first thing that's going to happen is people are going to tell you you're working too hard. Right? And then you might start believing like, oh, maybe I am working too hard. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I am supposed to enjoy life. It's better example for me is like my sugar addiction, right? And like when I'm like, I need to stop eating sugar. And then as soon as I do that, right away people say, yeah, but you gotta, everything in moderation. And it's like, it's no life to live without ever having a piece of cake and whatever, all the things that they say to me. And then I start to allow myself to buy into those belief systems, right? But in my heart, in my soul, I know that that's what I need to do to be 100% completely healthy. So the same thing is with whatever it is that you desire, whatever it is that you want to go out and get. I don't want to use the word desire. Whatever it is you want to bring into your life, you want to attract to your life, whatever you feel would be you maximizing your potential. Now is the time. There's never been a greater time. Now's not the time to not take action. Now's the time to get into massive action. We live in a world where you can do everything from your freaking phone, for Christ's sakes. You could create a whole entire business from your phone if you really wanted to. There is no more research that you need to do. Just go out there and do it. Because doing is always better than learning. This is something that Gary Vee talks about all the time. You learn more from doing than you ever will from actually learning. I'll take it back to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu again. It's like, I could watch a million videos on how to do an omoplata. But then if I tried to put it into action without ever actually doing it, I wouldn't be anywhere close to being able to pull that off. Right? So it's in action, it's in doing that we really learn. So the challenge that I'm going to give to everyone that's listening to this podcast is, it's like, stop believing that the world is over and it's time to take that collective sigh. Say, oh, it's time to relax. I've been working hard. It's like, have you though? Because that's what I'm saying to myself. It's like, have you? No. It's like, now's the time. We finally have all the distractions taken away. We don't have to work. We don't have to go into work. Because our business is the place you work for is shut down. You can't go to the movies. You can't even go to the freaking grocery store, basically. You can't visit family and friends. Like, this is it. This is your time. Get control of that fear and understand that the ego is just trying to protect you. Learn more about the ego. Learn how to eradicate it. Learn how to connect to your higher self. Figure out what it is that you want to do on this earth and start taking massive action to get there and do it. That's where I'll end it today. So thanks for taking the time to listen to the podcast. Don't forget, make sure you follow me on Instagram. It's David F. Haas. Facebook, it's David Haas. You can find me pretty much everywhere. If you love this podcast, please share it with somebody else, because it is in giving that we truly receive. And it's in cheering for other people's accomplishments that we truly feel accomplished ourselves. So thanks for taking the time to listen, and I will see you next Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the Rise Up Rich podcast. If this podcast helped you in any way, please subscribe and share it, because it is in giving that we receive, and it is in cheering for others' accomplishments that we become accomplished ourselves.